everybody. Welcome to another edition of Packers Unscripted from Packers.com. I am Mike Spofford, joined, as always, by my trusted colleague, Weston Hodkiewicz. We're coming to you here from our studios at Lambeau Field. Wes, fresh off of the schedule release for the 2025 season. The Packers schedule is out there. The entire NFL schedule is out there, and we're going to spend the bulk of this episode talking about it. And I'm just going to start with your thoughts. When you first glanced at the schedule, what was the first thing you noticed?
My eyes went to one thing, and it was what's happening week one. And that's the Green Bay Packers are back at Lambeau Field for the first time since 2018. The first time as Matt LaFleur in the position of Packers head coach. The Green Bay Packers will play a home opener at Lambeau Field in week one. And I just felt like this was important because I know you're the big baseball buff. I'm not. But I will say, I always felt like when opening day happens in Major League Baseball, if you're playing at home during opening day, that's a big deal. There's been so many times, I can't tell you, where the Brewers will start on a road trip and then eventually they have their home opener and my attention's already gone off to some other places. The NFL, the season, every weekend, every Sunday is huge, and I'm not saying it's not. And we've had some awesome Sundays the last few years. Obviously, Jordan Love, I'll never forget his first home opener as the starting quarterback against the New Orleans Saints 2 years ago, right? But I just think there's something special about actually having that first game right out of the gate. What I did not anticipate was, 4 days later, we're going to do this again. Who wants to play again? Because they'll welcome in a very talented, very deep, very dangerous Washington Commanders team. But the fact that Green Bay did finally get that opener, they're going to take on the Detroit Lions the first time, I think, in 24 years they're hosting the Lions in an opener. And I think it's the first time since 2005 that they're playing them at all. That is a fitting way, I feel like, to at least start off what is somewhat of an uneven, but always going to be imperfect schedule.
It is kind of crazy that it took this long into Matt LaFleur's tenure for the Packers to get a week one home games, because
longest stretch in franchise history.
Yeah, the Packers had opened their 100th season in 2018 with a home game against the Bears, and then they did not open another season at home until season 107, which is what this one and
they requested that one. Yeah. In 18.
Yeah, just
straight up booked for one since 17.
Yeah. Well, and you hinted at it as well. It's an interesting 1-2 right off the bat when you're playing actually two teams that played each other in the NFC divisional playoffs last year, the Lions and the Commanders. It'll be back-to-back. Both games at Lambeau, five day in a span of 5 days. The two games are just 4 days apart, a late Sunday afternoon and then a Thursday night game. And it's very interesting to me that it fell that way in a year in which the NFC, which of course includes the Packers, has the 8 home games and the 9 road games, that when you actually have one more road game on the schedule, that you would start out with back-to-back home games, because now that leaves you with 9 road games out of your last 15. It becomes a bit unbalanced in that regard. But starting out against Detroit and Washington, 2 playoff teams from a year ago, 2 teams with Super Bowl aspirations, it's a tremendous opportunity getting both of those teams at home right out of the gate. It's a tremendous opportunity for the Packers to make a statement of sorts as to where 2025 might be headed for Green Bay. The other intriguing thing, I think, just with opening against the Lions in particular, is they have a new offensive coordinator, a new defensive coordinator. Both of their coordinators from last year got head coaching jobs elsewhere. There's obviously plenty of confidence in Detroit on both sides of the ball that they can keep this thing rolling with Dan Campbell and the players they have and everything they've got going. But sometimes you just never know. Yeah. And there's going to be a lot of unknown with regard to, there always is with a week one game, but then a week one game against a team that has brand new coordinators on both sides of the ball. I'm not sure that I can recall anything like that happening in recent years around here.
Not where you lose both. And obviously some of that is somewhat telegraphed because Ben Johnson probably could have left for a job last year. He opted not to.
Yeah.
But so my point being with that comment is the Lions obviously have been bracing for his leaving here at some point, and obviously had their plans in place for how they were going to go about handling that. I will say, though, especially as it relates to the NFC North, a really interesting question in Insider Inbox this past week. asking about the probability of the Chicago Bears not taking a step forward with Ben Johnson taking over as the head coach, but also the Detroit Lions taking a step back without him as their offensive coordinator.
Yeah.
That is an interesting way to look at it, because what is the probability of those two things both happening? Is Chicago going to make a big jump, but is Detroit going to take a step back? Is Detroit going to keep the train on the tracks, but is Chicago going to become this giant that everybody's been thinking they were going to be for the last, decade that they've been billed as a lot of times during the offseason? We'll have to wait and see. But past happenings don't always indicate future success. So I'm just very interested to see if Detroit can legitimately stay on top of the mountain, and if Chicago can actually claw itself back into this thing. In either case, with the Packers' standpoint, two very intriguing matchups against the Lions, in that they open the season and they also travel there for Thanksgiving again, second time in 3 years. And then in Chicago's case, you actually won't see Ben Johnson. You won't be a part of that rivalry yet until, week 14?
Yeah.
Being they start that stretch of 2 games in 3 weeks. Two very interesting ways to go out tackling two of the Packers' biggest rivals.
Well, you mentioned the Thanksgiving game in Detroit, and that was the other thing that really caught my eye right away, and it's what I wrote about on the website. In my column, you wrote the 10 things about the schedule, and I kind of focused on this one particular element, which is that the Packers have 2 Thursday games, so you have 2 short weeks, and so that gives you 2 different segments of your schedule where you're playing 2 games in a span of 5 days. But the 2 games in 5 days are Lions-Commanders and then Vikings-Lions on the week of Thanksgiving. The Packers have 9 games on their schedule in 2025 against teams that made the playoffs a year ago. 4 of those 9 are in these Sunday, Thursday, these 2 games within 5 days things. We've been a part of these before, Wes, because every team has to deal with it when you play a Sunday followed by a Thursday. And yeah, sure, there's plenty of times where you win one, you lose one, and that's how this league goes. But man, you can really set yourself up with a lot of momentum if you can win both of those games, and you can really find yourself, struggling and needing a reset if you drop 2 games in a span of 5 days. These are inflection points in any given NFL schedule when you have to cram 2 games into such a short time frame there. And the fact that all of the matchups, the 4 matchups in these 2 5-day spans that the Packers are dealing with, one in September, one in November, leading into Thanksgiving, the matchups are huge. They're going to have made the major implications because of the teams that the Packers are facing in those matchups.
An excellent point by you. And I mean, is there any better example of what you just talked about than the 2023 Packers? I mean, their season was at a crossroads when they hosted the Los Angeles Chargers. They beat the Chargers, and then they surprised the world, and they beat a streaking Detroit Lions
Completely
team.
Turned the season around.
And a week after that, beat the Kansas City Chiefs, who end up going on and winning the Super Bowl.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, that's the difference. That's a team that went from 4-6 to suddenly being right there at 6-6 by a matter of just taking care of business.
Yeah, absolutely. It's as I said, these are crucial stretches, and the fact that the Packers have 2 of them on the schedule and the matchups that they're facing in those are going to have such big implications in the NFC picture if things go somewhat as we expect, with teams like the Lions and the Commanders and the Packers and the Vikings staying as contenders.
So before we shot this, and we also did our little Q&A video as well beforehand, I have one guy. There's one human being that I will always say yes to an interview. It's Mike Heller. Good friend of mine, do the pregame radio show with him, works for iHeartRadio out of Milwaukee. And I told him, today's the only day I wasn't, but it was because of Mike. I'm like, I'll do it for you. We have enough other stuff going on. I'll do it for you. So the point I'm illustrating with that is we got into an interesting discussion. I'll be interested to hear your thoughts on this, because the question came up about all of us thinking that we were going to be playing, the Green Bay Packers would be playing on Christmas here, based on the fact that they were going to take on the Chicago Bears on that Saturday in Week 16.
Yeah, December 20th.
So my question for you is, and then I'll tell you what my response was this. Would you rather be home on Christmas for a game or be in Detroit for Thanksgiving? Or be on the road. Doesn't have to be Detroit, but just be on the road for Thanksgiving or home on Christmas?
Given my druthers, I would probably say home on Christmas. But I will say this: playing on Thanksgiving, I don't mind the Detroit game because A, it's a quick flight, and B, it's the earliest game on Thanksgiving.
That's true. That's true.
You know, I mean, I've covered. I'd have to count it up. I think I've covered 4 or 5 of the Packers Thanksgiving games in Detroit in my tenure. And now this year they moved the kickoff back to noon Central. It used to be 11:30, and with that 11:30 kickoff, like I'd be walking back in the door at home at like 6:30 for a late Thanksgiving dinner with my family.
Yeah.
You know, can't quite get back that early now because they've moved the kickoff back to 12. But I've never minded that the Thanksgiving game in Detroit because of how close it is and because it's the early one. Last year, hosting Thanksgiving, you know, with the night game, you know, eating all the turkey during the day and then having to work really, really late hours with all of our
we were
post-game
super
coverage and
productive.
stuff. That was tough. That was tough, and it was the if I'm not mistaken, that was the start of 4 night games in a row or whatever last year. So at least there's nothing like that.
That's true.
On the 2025 schedule.
If I never have to eat turkey in the Ford Field press box again in my life, though, I wouldn't necessarily be upset.
And that's the thing is when I know that I'm coming home to have Thanksgiving dinner, like I just don't even eat the turkey in the press box.
Well, good, because it's usually gone by the time you end up getting up there
and
anyway.
I don't even worry about it. You know, I just maybe grab a couple of side dishes that I know aren't going to be back at home. But
it was the question had come up with Mike when we were doing the show, because it was like, we kind of, you know, dodged a little bit of a fiasco there, not having Christmas. I'm like, I think I would have taken Christmas over being in.
Yeah, home on Christmas is always a good thing. The other thing I want to mention, though, with regard to that Thanksgiving game, so you have the Vikings on the Sunday before Thanksgiving at Lambeau, then you go to Detroit for Thanksgiving. That begins the final 7 weeks of the regular season, in which 5 of the Packers' NFC North games are in those final 7, including, as you mentioned earlier, playing the Bears twice in a span of 3 weeks there in December. So you have Vikings-Lions on Thanksgiving week. You got the 2 games with the Bears in a span of 3 weeks, and then you finish in week 18 at Minnesota. So 5 of your 6 division games are essentially from Thanksgiving week to the end of the year. Really, really backloaded in terms of those NFC North matchups, and that's another intriguing piece to this schedule.
It definitely is. And again, we were trying to find some information on this as far as if there's ever been anything where it's been that backlogged. The only other time they've played 5 games in the last 7 weeks was since 2002, the realignment was 2012. But to have this many in that tight of a window is remarkable.
Yeah.
And to go 2.5 months without playing your division, it seems like, I couldn't give you the exact year on this. It seems like they've actually done this a couple times now, at least during my time covering the team, where they go these elongated stretches without playing the NFC North, and then everything kind of feels funneled there at the end. Again, we'll have to wait and see. Packers took care of business last year against the AFC South. I think they might have cleared out the AFC South by the time they played Minnesota, was it? There was like one team I don't even think they had faced yet.
Yeah, I believe that's true.
By the time they'd already wrapped up their 4 games against the South. So it's just the way schedules go. You know, the way you got to build a schedule somehow. Not everybody's always going to be happy. For me personally, it's been neat to see another mid-season bye. I enjoy the mid-season bye as someone that, you know, is trying to formulate a life out of in addition to having a career. But be that as it may, it's going to be a challenge and something the Packers are going to have to tackle.
Yeah, that the early bye is not ideal. We've talked about that plenty of times in previous years. The Packers have certainly had their fair share of early bye weeks, and it's interesting because back in 2022 when the Packers went to London in week 5, I believe it was, the league gives you the option after an international trip that you can take your bye the next week. And the Packers chose not to because they felt that week 6 was too early. They wanted to have the bye later in the season. So the Packers have turned down that early bye, yet there's all these other years where the league just hands it to them anyway and says, here, week 5, week 6, here's your bye. This is when you get your week off.
In the year they got that London game, they turned down the week 6 bye. Next, here you go, week 13. Enjoy yourself.
Yeah,
We're
exactly.
in December. Enjoy your break.
Yeah, they put it at the extreme on the other end. I'll take care of a little bit of sponsor business here, Wes, and then we'll get back to it. Sirius XM NFL Radio delivers hard-hitting analysis and up-to-the-minute NFL news flavors that true football fanatics need 24/7, 365. And at Cousin Subs, we have something for everyone, like our Wisconsin cheese curds, mac and cheese, golden fries, and creamy shakes, all paired with your favorite sub or sub in a bowl. Cousin Subs, 50-plus years of better. All right. We talked about some general themes and whatnot with regard to the schedule, but let's just highlight some individual games that catch your eye, that get the old metaphorical circle on the calendar. What jumps out at you?
I'm really interested to see the Cincinnati Bengals come in here after the bye. We haven't, in all the content you and I have done so far, we really haven't talked much about that yet, but the Joe Burrow show there with Daniels and obviously, T. Higgins and everything he's done in this league, this is going to be, or Jamar Chase, excuse me.
Yeah,
I said
Chase.
Daniels. This is going to be a huge, huge challenge, trying to slow them down. I mean, people forget they just missed out on making the playoffs, but there might not have been a hotter team down the stretch last season than the Bengals once they started getting everything together.
Yeah.
It looked like, I mean, in a lot of ways, Mike, it's really hard for a guy to be in like legitimate MVP contention when you're not on a playoff team. But I mean, Joe Burrow, a case could be made that he was the most important player to any team last year based on what that could have potentially been like for Cincinnati had he not been around.
Yeah.
But they were able to get some momentum at the end of the season. Packers have a tough stretch, and we've talked a lot about that early stretch, but coming out of the bye and then immediately getting that greatest show on Kentucky Bluegrass down there in Cincinnati, that is not going to be an easy task at all.
Yeah, and I'll say I'm looking forward to seeing Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase like in person for the first time, because the only other time in the era of those two stars for Cincinnati that the Packers have played them was during one of the two, I guess it would have been 2021, one of the COVID seasons when we actually weren't traveling.
Yeah.
So that ended up being the crazy overtime game in Cincinnati with the missed field goals and everything else, and then the Packers ultimately prevailed. But you and I have never seen Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase in that offense like live. We didn't
even get a chance to see him in the joint practices.
Yeah, no, that's true. We
missed him with that too because of his calf injury or whatever it was.
Yeah, interesting tidbit I'll throw at you though, because obviously the Packers and the Bengals don't play each other all that often. The last two times Green Bay and Cincinnati have played in the regular season, the game has gone to overtime.
Oh, wow. Yes, it did. I did know that.
And 2021, and now here we are again in 2025. But sticking with the AFC North, I don't have to explain myself here, but certainly the game in Pittsburgh, under the lights, primetime game, along the Allegheny there in Pittsburgh. It's a great setting for football. It's a wonderful stadium. It's a really neat place, and if what we think is going to happen at the quarterback position for that matchup, of course, that game against Pittsburgh has our eye. And then speaking of players,
talking about Mason Rudolph, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Okay. Speaking of players that we haven't gotten to see live, Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, finally.
Now, of course, it's going to be at the end of the season. Who knows where things could be injury-wise? Anything can happen in this league. But in Week 17, the Packers will be hosting the Baltimore Ravens either on Saturday or Sunday. It's one of those games that could end up being chosen for either day. But the only time in the Lamar Jackson era that the Packers and the Ravens have met was in 2021, and Lamar Jackson was hurt, and Tyler Huntley was the quarterback for the Ravens in that game, another one that we were not there for in Baltimore, and another one that was kind of crazy, coming right down to the end, and the Packers had to stop a 2-point conversion in order to win the game as Huntley was leading this like 2-touchdown comeback in the fourth quarter. But I'll be really intrigued to potentially see Lamar Jackson, live and playing for real, not just in a preseason game, but live. And here we go.
Yeah, it was impressive just watching him in the joint practice.
Yeah, the joint practice.
And just the guy moves different. He throws the ball different. And he is a specimen in every way you could put it. And one of the more unique skill sets of this generation of quarterbacks. So it'll be really neat. It's also curious that it's going to have that sort of December flavor to it as well. seeing how those elements could potentially affect the game the last week of 2025.
Yeah, and the Ravens have certainly played their share in the cold
sure.
in the AFC North, and not only in Baltimore, but Pittsburgh and Cleveland and Cincinnati and all that. They've played their share of cold weather games, and I almost think like Lamar Jackson would be even more dangerous in the cold.
For sure.
He's already hard enough to tackle, and then you add the elements into it, and it could be even more difficult there.
Yeah.
Your thoughts also on the defending Super Bowl champs and the team that knocked the Packers out of the playoffs last year. Coming to Lambeau Field, the Eagles will be in Green Bay for a Monday night contest, and that will be in November 10th on Monday.
We're getting close here to the end of May here, so we'll see what happens as far as these tush-push guidelines and, the NFL tabled the discussions. It would be interesting to see if the Philadelphia Eagles get a different reception to what they've been giving out as it relates to that. If that happens to make its way into the season and the schedule and still being allowed in that particular form this season, I'd be curious to see how Packer fans would respond to seeing it. That being said, it's a very good opponent, very tough opponent, and one of the more well-rounded teams in the National Football League in terms of their construct. I really like how Howie Roseman has built this team. Huge offensive lines, athletic offensive lines, but they have been as good as anybody in the National Football League. When you're talking about why does this team become a Super Bowl champion? Well, it's because they've drafted well and they've signed players very well.
Yeah.
Howie Roseman has not missed at a lot of his swings lately. It just seems like things have kind of fallen their way in a lot of regards. And this will be a huge test for the Packers. I mean, again, there's a reason why, Mike, when we were going into this week, you were talking about, I think it's the fifth or sixth most difficult schedule based on last year that Green Bay has. And that doesn't necessarily tell you it's going to be that way again. Things can change quickly. It happened a few years ago for the Packers, where I think it was the 2022 season. It looked like it was going to be really
supposedly it was an easy schedule based on the records from the prior year, and then everything kind of flipped in terms of the expectations for certain teams.
Yeah, I think was it the East? One of the teams just played out of their mind relative to what everybody thought.
Well, the Giants were one of them.
Giants
they beat the Packers in London and ended up going on to win a road playoff game in Minnesota when that season was all said and done. The other thing you were talking about, the Eagles, we were talking about the Lions earlier and losing both coordinators. The Eagles are an interesting story because a few years back they go to the Super Bowl. They lose a close one in the Super Bowl to the Kansas City Chiefs right at the end of the game. They lose both of their coordinators to head coaching jobs. They come back the next year and they start 10-1. Yeah. They're looking like they're headed for the number one seed in the NFC playoffs. Everything completely unravels over the last 2 months of the regular season. They end up getting into the playoffs as a wild card. They go one and done and they're out. And then they come back the next year and they win the whole thing. So you just never know in this league. And whether any of that will apply to the Detroit Lions and what they're going to be going through this year, who knows? But
we've done so many shows. I can't remember if you brought this up on this one or if it was on the live Q&A we did too. But your point about the Denver Broncos too, and the fact that the Packers could potentially play a cold weather snow game at elevation is very interesting.
Yeah, at Denver in the middle of December. It's very rare in this franchise's history, or at least in the last 40 years of this franchise's history, to play a road game in the snow. Now, we don't know if it's going to be a snow game in the mountains that day out in Denver, but it would really be interesting to see the Packers, wearing the road uniforms and yet having all the snow falling around, because we've seen it so often at Lambeau, but it doesn't happen away from home very often.
And I forgot the point I was trying to make with the Baltimore Ravens, by the way. I found this stat in, I think it was our communications department. I create my superlatives, they do theirs. This is the point I was trying to bring it back full circle. Okay. Latest the Packers have ever played the Ravens too, in the season, week 17. I've never played them that late in the season. So if the Ravens are who everybody thinks they are, and they've been the last few years, and the Packers can continue to capitalize on their youth and their optimism and obviously their upside, that could be a really interesting intra-conference game that late in the season.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fun.
Well, with that, we will call it a wrap on this edition of Packers Unscripted. Be sure to follow all of our coverage of the team on Packers.com. And if you want anything on the schedule, we've got stories. There's a great schedule release video. Hats off to our social media team and all the folks that were involved in that. Had a lot of fun doing it. We don't take ourselves too seriously, as you can probably tell. But stories, videos, everything with regard to the schedule, graphics, cool stuff you can print out, put it on your refrigerator, and gear up for when September rolls around. But with that, for Wes, I am Mike. Thank you for tuning in, everybody, and we will see you next time.